It started as nothing more than an annoyance. At first, Jenna thought it was just her imagination, or maybe some kids playing pranks in her neighborhood. She lived alone in a small one-story house, tucked at the edge of a quiet suburban street. Her bedroom faced the backyard, and at night, with no nearby streetlights, the window beside her bed opened into almost complete darkness. The first time it happened, it was around 2 in the morning. A soft tapping against the glass woke her up. 3 distinct knocks, slow, deliberate, and too precise to be from a tree branch or an animal. When she sat up and looked, there was nothing but her reflection staring back at her in the faint glow of her nightstand lamp. She told herself it was her mind playing tricks and tried to go back to sleep. But the next night, it happened again. This time, it was louder. 4 knocks. She froze in bed, her ears straining. After 30 seconds of silence, she cautiously peeked through the blinds, expecting maybe a raccoon or some neighbor's cat, but the yard was empty. By the 3rd night, when the knocks returned, longer this time, as if someone's knuckles were dragging across the glass, Jenna realized this wasn't random. Someone was deliberately coming to her window in the middle of the night. The 3rd night shook Jenna more than she wanted to admit. She sat up in bed, heart hammering against her chest, staring at the blinds as if she could somehow see through them. She told herself not to look, not to encourage whatever or whoever it was. But after nearly a minute of silence, she slowly crept closer, her bare feet making no sound against the carpet. She pulled the blinds apart just a fraction, enough to peek through without fully revealing herself. Once again, the yard was empty. The grass glistened faintly under the moonlight, unmoving. The wooden fence that bordered her property cast long, dark shadows across the ground. Nothing. But still she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. For the rest of the night, she lay wide awake, her bedside lamp glowing faintly. Every creak of the house made her tense up. By morning, the knocks felt like a bad dream, until she noticed something. On the outside of her window, just below where the glass met the frame, was a smudge, a faint, oval-shaped mark, like the greasy outline of a hand pressed against the glass. Jenna swallowed hard. That wasn't there before. She tried to laugh it off when she mentioned it to her best friend over the phone later that day. Her friend insisted it was probably nothing, maybe even her own reflection causing the mark. But Jenna knew better. That night, she triple-checked that her doors were locked and even pushed a chair under the doorknob to her back door, something she'd never done before. When she finally fell asleep, it didn't last long. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the knocks came again, this time louder, this time faster. Her eyes shot open, and for a moment she couldn't move. It felt like her body refused to respond, frozen in pure fear. But as she sat up, she noticed something new. The knocks weren't just on her window anymore. There was another sound, a dragging noise. It was faint but clear. Something scraping along the side of the house, moving from her window toward the living room at the front. She listened in complete silence. Her breath caught in her throat. The sound stopped, and the house went quiet again. Fighting against her own fear, Jenna grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Whispering into the receiver, she explained that someone was outside her house. The dispatcher told her to stay calm, and that an officer would be there within minutes. She waited in the living room, clutching a kitchen knife she'd grabbed from the counter, her phone in the other hand. She didn't dare turn on the lights. Instead, she sat in the dark, staring at the front door. Every second dragged on painfully, the silence pressing down on her. Then, just as the dispatcher assured her help was almost there, she heard it again. 3 slow knocks. But this time, they weren't at her bedroom window. They were at her front door. The sound of those 3 knocks on her front door nearly made Jenna drop the phone. She froze, staring at the door as her mind raced. Whoever had been at her window was now standing just feet away from her, separated only by a thin sheet of wood. The dispatcher's calm voice buzzed through her phone, asking if she was safe. if she could still hear the noises. Jenna, barely able to breathe, whispered, "They're at my front door." As if in response, there came another knock, this one louder, slower, drawn out, almost mocking. Jenna clutched the knife tighter, her knuckles white, and tried to remind herself that police were on their way. Then, suddenly, the knocking stopped. The silence was almost worse. She strained her ears but heard nothing. No footsteps, retreating, no movement at all. She crept backward toward the hallway, deciding to hide in the bathroom until she heard the sirens. She had just reached the door when the doorknob of her front door rattled violently. The sharp metallic sound echoed through the house, making her gasp. Whoever it was, they were trying to get in. The dispatcher kept her talking, urging her to stay calm, but her voice trembled as she whispered that the intruder was trying the door. The rattling stopped, replaced with a new sound, scratching. It was subtle at first, then more frantic. Something metallic scraped against the lock as if they were trying to pick it. Her heart pounded so loud she thought the intruder might hear it. She backed into the bathroom, locking the door and crouching in the bathtub, with her knife still in hand. She pressed the phone against her ear, straining to hear what was happening outside. Then came the sound that made her blood run cold, the faint creak of the front door opening. The dispatcher immediately told her to stay hidden, whispering that the police were seconds away. Jenna held her breath, praying the intruder wouldn't find her. Footsteps echoed across the hardwood floor of her living room, slow, deliberate. Whoever it was wasn't rushing. They were exploring. The footsteps drew closer, moving down the hallway. Jenna's grip on the knife tightened until her hand shook. She tried to stay quiet, but the sound of her own breathing seemed deafening. The steps stopped, right outside the bathroom door. She pressed her hand against her mouth to stop a scream from escaping. The silence stretched on forever, until a loud pounding rattled the bathroom door, followed by a muffled laugh. And then, in the distance, sirens wailed. The pounding on the bathroom door stopped. The second the sirens grew closer, Jenna sat frozen, unable to move, knife still shaking in her hands. She heard the footsteps retreat down the hallway, then the creak of her front door opening again. Moments later, red and blue lights flashed through the bathroom window. A voice shouted from outside, and then heavy footsteps stormed through the house. The police had arrived. When they finally opened the bathroom door, Jenna burst into tears of relief. The officers swept through the house, checking every room, every corner. But the intruder was gone. The only evidence left behind was her wide-open front door and, disturbingly, a set of fresh handprints smeared across her bedroom window. Large, greasy palms pressed flat against the glass, exactly where she had heard the knocks night after night. The police told her she was lucky. Whoever it was had been seconds away from finding her when they arrived. They couldn't say if it was someone who had been watching her, or just a random break-in. The only thing they knew for certain was that he had been inside her house. Jenna never spent another night there. She packed her things and moved in with family the very next week. But even months later, she swears that every so often, usually around 2 a.m, she'll wake up to the sound of 3 slow knocks on her window. Daniel had lived alone for the past 3 years. His small, 2-bedroom apartment sat on the 3rd floor of an aging brick building in a quiet part of town. The walls were thin, and sometimes he could hear his neighbors arguing or their TVs playing late at night, but he had grown used to it. One night, though, something felt different. He had been lying on his couch watching a movie when he dozed off. Around 1:30 a.m, he woke to silence. The kind of silence that seemed unnatural for his building. No muffled music, no footsteps upstairs, just dead quiet. As he sat up and rubbed his eyes, he heard it. The sound of a single footstep coming from the hallway just outside his bedroom. Slow, heavy, and deliberate. He froze, straining his ears, trying to convince himself it was from the apartment above. But the sound came again, closer this time. Daniel's blood ran cold as he realized it wasn't coming from the ceiling. It was inside his apartment. The footsteps grew louder, echoing softly against the wooden floorboards. He didn't own a pet. No one else had a key. And he knew, without a doubt, that he had locked his door that night. Heart racing, he stared at the dark hallway, waiting to see what would step out from it. Daniel sat frozen on the couch, his eyes locked on the dark hallway. The soft glow of the TV was the only light in the room, and it barely illuminated the opening where the hallway began. His apartment was small, but right now, it felt like a labyrinth, one where something was hiding just out of sight. The footsteps stopped for several seconds, leaving him in silence. He tried to convince himself he was half asleep, still dreaming, but then it came again. Another slow step. This one was louder, almost like whoever, or whatever, was out there wanted him to know they were moving closer. Grabbing the TV remote, Daniel muted the sound, needing absolute silence to listen. His heart pounded so loudly that it nearly drowned out the faint creak of the floorboards. The hallway was only about 10 feet long, ending at his bedroom door. His bathroom was halfway down on the left. That meant whoever was walking was just a few steps away from entering his living room. Daniel reached for his phone on the coffee table, but as soon as he picked it up, the footsteps stopped. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. He slowly unlocked his phone, opened the dialer, and hovered his thumb over the emergency number. Before he could press call, a new sound emerged. Breathing. It was faint, but unmistakable. The sound of someone inhaling and exhaling slowly, coming from the hallway. Daniel's mouth went dry. His first instinct was to bolt out the front door, but doing that meant walking past the hallway entrance, past whoever was standing there. Instead, he slid off the couch as quietly as possible, crouching low as he moved toward the kitchen. He kept his phone gripped tightly in his hand, knife block in sight. Just as he reached for one of the knives, his phone buzzed loudly in his hand. A notification. The sharp vibration shattered the silence. The breathing stopped. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps. Fast, heavy, running straight toward the living room. Daniel yanked a knife from the block and spun around, expecting to see someone charging out of the hallway. But the space was empty. His living room, his kitchen, the hallway entrance. All silent, all still. For several seconds, he stood there shaking, the knife pointed out in front of him. He didn't move until he heard another sound, something that made his stomach drop. The click of his bedroom door closing. He hadn't left it closed. He was sure of it. Daniel's voice cracked as he shouted, "Who's there?" His own words echoed back at him, unanswered. The silence afterward felt endless until the sound of light footsteps padded across his bedroom floor. Someone was in there. Gripping the knife tighter, Daniel debated his options. He could wait for the police, but what if the intruder came back into the hallway? What if they decided to rush him? His hands shook as he finally dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher that someone had broken into his apartment. The operator told him to stay on the line and stay safe. But then, as Daniel crept back toward the hallway, he noticed something chilling. The bathroom door was cracked open slightly, a sliver of darkness inside, and he could swear he saw an eye staring out at him. Daniel's blood ran cold. He froze in place, his phone trembling in one hand, the kitchen knife in the other. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker, asking him to describe what was happening, but Daniel couldn't respond. His eyes were locked on that narrow gap in the bathroom door. He had only glimpsed it for a second, but he knew what he saw. The faint outline of a face, an eye staring directly at him, unblinking. Summoning every ounce of courage, he whispered into the phone, "They're in my bathroom." The dispatcher told him officers were on the way, urging him not to confront the intruder, but Daniel's body had already gone into survival mode. The bathroom door creaked softly, shifting open an inch wider. Daniel's grip tightened around the knife. As his heart thundered in his chest, he stepped backward slowly, careful not to make a sound, until his heel hit the wall behind him. Then, silence. No movement, no breathing, Just silence. The dispatcher repeated his name, but Daniel barely heard her. His focus was on the hallway. He thought he might be losing his mind, until the bathroom door suddenly slammed shut with a force that shook the apartment. Daniel jumped, nearly dropping his phone. The sound was deafening in the quiet space. He raised the knife in front of him, waiting for the door to burst open, but it didn't. Instead, he heard the lock click from the inside. Someone had locked themselves in his bathroom. Daniel's fear turned into confusion. If the intruder was trying to hurt him, why would they trap themselves? Unless they weren't alone. His thoughts were cut short by the sound of a different door creaking. Slowly, painfully slow, his bedroom door opened down the hall. A shadow stretched across the floor, long and distorted. Daniel's heart almost stopped. There weren't one, but two people in his apartment. He whispered frantically into the phone, telling the dispatcher there was more than one intruder. She told him to stay hidden, stay calm, but there was nowhere to hide. His only option was to run for the front door. He bolted. Knife in hand, he sprinted toward the exit, his bare feet slapping against the wood floor. Just as he reached for the doorknob, he felt it, the cold rush of air behind him, followed by the rapid thuds of footsteps charging down the hallway after him. Daniel twisted the lock, flung the door open, and stumbled into the apartment building's dimly lit corridor. Behind him, the footsteps stopped dead at the threshold, as if the intruder, or intruders, refused to leave the apartment. The last thing he saw before slamming the door shut was the bathroom door opening slowly, a pale hand gripping the frame from inside. Daniel stayed in the hallway, pressing his back against the opposite wall, the knife still in his hand as he panted for air. Within minutes, two police officers rushed up the stairs, guns drawn after his frantic call. He pointed at his apartment door, stammering out that there were people inside. The officers moved quickly, entering the apartment while Daniel stayed behind. He expected shouting, a struggle, something, but all he heard was silence. After a few tense minutes, one officer returned, shaking his head. The apartment was empty. Daniel insisted they search again. He told them about the eye in the bathroom, the footsteps, the second shadow from his bedroom. But after a thorough sweep, the officers found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no one hiding in the closets or under the bed. The only detail they couldn't explain was the bathroom door. It was still locked from the inside when they arrived, and they had to force it open. The small windowless room was empty, but something about the air inside made Daniel's skin crawl. It was ice cold, far colder than the rest of the apartment. The officers left, chalking it up to Daniel being half asleep or paranoid. But Daniel knew what he saw, what he heard. He never spent another night in that apartment. Even now, though, when he stays at his new place, he sometimes wakes up in the middle of the night to the faint sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving down the hallway outside his bedroom. When Sarah and Mark bought their first house, it felt like a dream come true. It was an older two-story place on the outskirts of town, with creaky wooden floors and ivy creeping up the bricks. But it had character. The previous owner had passed away, and the place had been sitting on the market for a while, which meant they were able to get it for far less than they expected. The only odd thing about the house was the room at the end of the upstairs hallway. The door was heavy, painted a dull gray that didn't match the rest of the house, and it had an old-fashioned lock on it. When they asked about it, the realtor just shrugged, saying it had always been that way, and the previous owner never used it. Sarah laughed it off at first, joking that it was their mystery room, but Mark didn't like how it felt. Every time they walked by it, he swore he caught a faint draft coming from the edges of the door, like the room was breathing. For the first few weeks, they ignored it. They had plenty to unpack and settle in, and besides, the door never budged no matter how hard Mark tried. But one night, just past midnight, Sarah woke up to a sound she couldn't place, a loud metallic click echoing down the hallway. When she got up to check, She realized with horror that the sound had come from the locked door. It wasn't locked anymore. Sarah stood at the end of the hallway, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor. The door to the mysterious room was slightly ajar, something she had never seen before. Her heart thudded in her chest as she stared at the dark gap, a faint smell of dust and mildew drifting out. "Mark," she whispered, shaking his shoulder when she hurried back to the bedroom. "The door, it's open." Mark, half asleep, grumbled in confusion but followed her into the hallway. Sure enough, the door that had resisted every attempt at opening was now unlocked, the keyhole glinting faintly in the moonlight coming through the upstairs window. Against his better judgment, Mark pushed the door open wider. The hinges groaned, echoing down the silent house. Inside was a small, windowless room, no bigger than a walk-in closet. Dust floated through the air, and the walls were bare, except for deep scratch marks running vertically down the plaster. At the center of the room sat an old rocking chair. Sarah frowned. "That wasn't here before, was it?" Mark shook his head. The realtor hadn't mentioned any furniture being left behind, and they had checked every other room when they moved in. But something about the chair unsettled him. It faced the corner of the room, turned deliberately away from the door, as if someone had been sitting there for a long time. They didn't go inside that night. Mark shut the door and told Sarah not to worry, promising they'd deal with it in the morning. But when he turned the knob to close it, he realized something chilling. The lock was on the inside. That night, neither of them slept well. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside, made Sarah jump. At one point, she swore she heard a faint creaking sound, the rhythmic groan of wood bending back and forth, almost like a rocking chair moving slowly in the dark. The next morning, Mark suggested they just leave the room shut, maybe even nail it closed. But Sarah couldn't shake her curiosity. By late afternoon, she convinced him to help her clear it out. Armed with gloves and a flashlight, they entered the room. Up close, the scratches on the walls were worse than they looked from the hallway. They weren't random scuffs. They looked like deep gouges made by fingernails, long, vertical streaks that reached nearly from floor to ceiling. Mark turned the chair around, only to find something carved into the wood of the seat. A single word, etched over and over again, until the surface was nearly shredded. "Stay." Sarah backed out of the room, uneasy. "This feels wrong," she whispered. That night, they kept the door shut. But around 3 a.m., Sarah woke up again, this time to a sound that froze her blood. The distinct creak of the rocking chair, moving steadily back and forth. When she shook Mark awake, they both listened in silence as the sound continued from the other side of the door. Rocking, rocking, rocking. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped, followed by the faint sound of footsteps, leaving the room and walking down the hallway toward their bedroom. Mark leapt out of bed, grabbing the baseball bat he kept under the frame. Sarah clutched the blanket to her chest, eyes wide, staring at the bedroom door. The footsteps had stopped just outside. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came a slow, deliberate knock on their bedroom door. 1, 2, 3. Mark shouted, demanding to know who was there, but there was no response. He inched closer, bat raised, his breath shaky. The knob rattled, then turned slightly before stopping. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other side wasn't trying to hide anymore. Summoning courage, Mark yanked the door open and swung the bat into the hallway. But the space was empty. No one stood there, except the door to the locked room was wide open again. From inside, the rocking chair creaked, moving back and forth on its own. Mark tightened his grip on the bat, stepping toward the room despite Sarah's desperate pleas for him to stay back. The air grew colder as he approached. The scratches on the walls seemed deeper, fresher, as though they had been made recently. The chair rocked steadily, though there was no one in it. Mark raised the bat and shoved the chair to a stop. That's when he noticed something carved freshly into the wall above it, a phrase that hadn't been there earlier. I told you to stay! Sarah screamed from behind him as the bedroom door slammed shut, trapping her inside. Mark spun back toward the hallway just in time to see a shadow stretch across the floor, long and unnatural, moving against the direction of the light. The chair began rocking again, faster this time. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, like something unseen was building momentum. Mark shouted at Sarah to call the police, but her voice was drowned out by the deafening creaks of the chair. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Mark saw movement. The shadow detached itself from the wall, rising, forming the shape of a tall figure with long arms that stretched almost to the floor. Its head tilted unnaturally as it stepped closer to him. Mark swung the bat with all his strength, but it passed through the figure like smoke. The thing let out a low, guttural sound that rattled his chest. Its hand, cold and heavy, wrapped around the bat, yanking it away effortlessly. The rocking chair screeched to a violent stop. The figure leaned close, its face still obscured in shadow, and whispered in a voice that seemed to come from inside Mark's skull, "Stay." When Sarah finally managed to force the bedroom door open, the hallway was empty. The rocking chair was still now, sitting perfectly still in the middle of the room. But Mark was gone. His bat lay splintered on the floor, and his phone, cracked and smeared with dust, sat just inside the doorway. Sarah screamed his name, tearing through the house, checking every room, every corner. The police arrived minutes later after her frantic 911 call, but there was no trace of him. No forced exits, no broken windows. It was as if Mark had simply vanished into thin air. The officers tried to calm her, insisting he must have run out of the house in panic. But Sarah knew better. She told them about the rocking chair, the scratches on the wall, the word carved into the wood. They humored her, but when they checked the room, the walls were bare. The carvings were gone. The chair sat motionless, facing the corner again. Mark was never found. Sarah moved out a week later, unable to spend another night in the house. But before she left, she swore she heard something while packing boxes upstairs. A faint creak coming from the locked room. The sound of a rocking chair moving back and forth, steady and patient. And just before she shut the door for the last time, she noticed something freshly scratched into the floorboards. "Now you stay."